right, so today is part 31, and it's also part 4 of Yirmiyahu, of Jeremiah, of the Heart of the Matter series. Okay, so this is the Heart of the Matter, part 31, and we're going to start in Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, chapter 9. Jeremiah chapter 9, and we should be able to get this chapter covered today, and then maybe even a little bit of another chapter. We'll see how it plays out. Okay, so remember again, our context here is that Yirmiyahu is the voice or the spokesman for the creator of the universe, who is not pleased with this particular group of people that are covenanted with him. This would be the southern kingdom of Judah, and he has sent Jeremiah to try to wake them up. And so that's sort of the context of the overall story here. And so we're now into chapter 9, and we're going to begin in verse 1. And believe it or not, the word heart actually comes up in 4 different verses here in this chapter. So we're going to hit that a few places. But there's some other things that I really want to hit on as well as we go through the chapter. So let's begin in chapter 9. Oh, that my head were waters, and my eyes a fountain of tears, and I would weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people. Oh, that I had in the wilderness a lodging place for wayfaring men, and I would leave my people and go for them. For they are all adulterers, an assembly of treacherous men. Could you imagine behaving in such a way that he would feel that way about you? But what we need to do, again, as always, is look to, well, what were they doing? And then say, is there anything that I'm doing that is in any way similar to what they were doing? Because look at how he feels about that. See, sometimes you may wonder, I wonder how he feels when I do this or that. Well, why don't we see in the scriptures where other people did something similar and see how he felt about it? Then you'd probably get a pretty good clue how he feels about when you do things. Because here he's saying, wow, he says, the whole thing, they're all adulterers, an assembly of treacherous men, and they bend their tongue like a bow. Falsehood and not truth prevails on the earth, for they proceed from evil to evil, and they have not known me, declares Yahweh. Now, let's understand what he's talking about when he's talking about falsehood. He's not saying they're just a bunch of pathological liars. What he's saying is that they're lying specifically about him. Okay? It's not just that they, say up is down and left is right and whatever. No, he's mostly concerned with the stuff where the adultery and the treacherousness is all connected to their relationship with him, or the leadership's relationship with the people and how they're leading the people in regard to him. That's what he's mostly concerned about here. So he says, look, they bend their tongue like a bow, falsehood and not truth. So it has to do with how they speak about him or about his things. His ways, what he wants done. And mostly we've seen in Scripture, and we'll see it some more, I'm sure, is when people claim he said something he didn't claim. And so he says the reason they do this, though, is this: they have not known me. And we've talked about this basically till we're blue in the face, this whole relational idea of knowing. They've not had the correct understanding or relationship with me. And we've talked about how this has probably happened at least once in your life where you've looked at somebody and said, I can't believe you would think I would do that. I thought you knew me better. Have you ever said that to anybody? You've been accused of something, or someone thought you did something, and you look at them and say, you know me. How could you think I would do that? Because you think you have a relationship where they actually know you, your character. See, when he says they haven't known me, it's not like they don't know he exists. This is the problem with mainstream Christianity. They all know he exists, but do they understand the relationship he desires and that he requires in terms of moving forward? And so knowing he exists, knowing that the Messiah came, knowing that he died, knowing he was resurrected, all of this is useful information if it then leads to relationship. Otherwise, it's just information. There's no power in it. There's nothing for you as far as you're concerned. There's awesome power in what Yeshua did, but you don't necessarily get to participate or be benefited by that if you don't understand what it all means and have a relationship with that. And so here he's saying, look, they have not known me. What's it say in 1 John? It says, those who say they know him and keep not the commandments are liars. You see how that integrates in here? Now, if the people in 1 John were familiar with Jeremiah 9, I think their hearts and their minds, the Ruach, would lead them to connect the two. Because in 1 John it says, right in chapter 2, it says, those who say they know him and keep not his commandments are liars, and the truth is not in them. Well, what did he just say here? He says, look, they bend their tongue like a bow, falsehood and not truth, because they have not known me. They proceed from evil to evil. Again, let's redefine evil scripturally. I know we have to keep hitting this all the time. Evil is breaking a commandment. It's not just limited to the overtly, even that the stuff the world thinks is evil. Because there is stuff that everybody agrees is evil. Abba's saying that is true, that is evil, but it's more. Not listening to me is what he considers evil. He says, when you don't listen to me, that's evil. When you do what you want instead of what I say, that's evil. So because look at the connection. He's connecting evil to evil. So they proceed from evil to evil to falsehood and not truth. What's the definition of truth? The word, the Torah, the Yeshua, there's all the truth. And so this is the connection here. He says, they have not known me. If they knew me, they wouldn't do this stuff. Continue, verse 4. Let everyone beware of his neighbor and not trust any brother, for every brother catches by the heel and every neighbor walks with slanderers. So now he's saying is, look, you can't trust your neighbors, not so much because they're going to steal your stuff or sleep with your spouse or murder you. It's because they're going to lead you into this falsehood and not truth. Okay, he's concerned about that part. See, because if you were in that part correctly, he would protect you from the other stuff. So you're not to worry about the adultery that may happen to you or the stealing that may happen to you or someone may kill you. If you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it brings protection. So he's saying, look, be aware and be afraid of that they would grab you by the heel and lead you to walk with slanderers. Now we got the word slander in there. That is absolutely them proving my point, which is that they are falsely representing the Creator. They are slandering him. If you claim to be his and walk in a way that is not in line with what he has said, you are actually slandering his name. So don't be so worried about necessarily what we do in terms of how we say his name. I would be much more worried about the things we do claiming to be doing it in his name, in his authority. Because otherwise, we are slanderers. We are slandering. By the way, that's why when you see in Leviticus and other places, it'll say, and do this and don't do that, and do this and don't do that, and then it sticks in there in the middle of all of that, and don't bring the name of Yahweh to nothing. Because it's those actions that, if they're not walked correctly, that bring his name shame and not honor. To bring it to, basically, we end up slandering the name. He says, so look, beware of your neighbor, because you know what? The wheat and the tares are together. We've all read that parable. We know the wheat and the tares grow together. So he's saying, look, beware. That doesn't mean don't love and don't trust your fellow brother on that other level, but be aware that they could easily, because you love them and trust them so much, lead you astray. So you need to always be on the watch. We're called to be watchmen or guards of the commandments. So always be on the watch, because the one who is most dangerous to you is the one you love the most, the one you trust the most. I'm not telling you to be paranoid. I'm telling you to be aware, because they could be used. And it's not necessarily a fault of their own. They may have gotten discouraged. They may have had something happen that hurt them so much that rather than go through it and come out the other end healed, they decided to lash out against the Creator for allowing it to happen. And now all of a sudden, from that ugly place, they're now going to lead astray. And so be careful. He says, look, in verse 5, he says, and everyone deceives his neighbor, and no one speaks the truth. And they have taught their tongue to speak falsehood and have wearied themselves to crook. Do you not know anybody out there that has gotten excited about some peripheral understanding about something, whether it's the calendar or Shabbat or the Godhead or some other thing, and they are just wearying themselves out trying to convince everybody how right they are? I mean, they are just relentless. Anybody run into any of those relentless people? This is what he's talking about here. He's saying, look, be aware that the people that are going in these directions, they have a relentlessness because they have a need to appease the turmoil in their own self, to have other people agree with them, because that will ameliorate them. That will make them feel better where they are. Does that make any sense? And so they need you to agree with them because that appeases their conscience. But meanwhile, they're lashing out. He says, now I'm not saying everybody that's gone in a direction is the one lashing out. I'm saying the people that are pushing this stuff often come from that place. And then the rest of us who maybe don't know enough can easily get dragged into something that looks right, sounds right, and is convincing because we don't know enough. By the way, that's why you need to be in a congregation or covering or assembly or some sort of at least virtual thing like we have for those on the live stream and those watching on the YouTube here, is that you need those you can go to that can say, hold on, time out, that's not safe. That's not correct. Of course, the hard part is how do you find somebody like that that's actually not just as bad as the person you're trying to avoid? Because they may be the one that's leading you into we have plenty of that out there, we all know it. This is the way that the enemy wins and the Father struggles, right? And it's not that the Father really struggles, it's just that that's what it looks like. So the Father puts it on you. Are you going to be one who gets into the Word and then looks for a leader you can trust and not just say, I don't trust any leaders? Because a lot of people out there just say, I don't trust anybody. But you need one. Scripture says you need one. Because it's that one that can help you to know how to stay centered and not to be dragged to the left or the right and be tempted by every wind of doctrine. And by the way, we like to always mock people. Oh, they're just tempted by every... No, to the person going that way, they don't necessarily see themselves as unstable and able to be bent and twisted to every wind of doctrine. They're actually just ones who are seeking and asking, and then this was presented to them, and the person made such a good case, it sounded maybe right. I mean, after all, if you're new at this, you're all walking in a whole bunch of stuff you didn't know was right before. And so you don't know how far down the rabbit hole does this thing go? I mean, how did we have anything right? And then we start to say, not only did the church have a bunch of stuff wrong, but now you're wondering, does everybody even in the Messianic have things wrong? Because there's guys out there saying everybody's wrong except them. There's people out there saying that. They've got their one perfect right understanding of something that nobody else had before them, and they want to get everybody involved in that. And it all sounds good. It sounds, because they make a good argument. They use the verses to their best advantage. It sounds right. But you need some guidance. But of course, therein lies the challenge. And so trust the Father to lead you to proper guidance. Because he says, everyone deceives their neighbor and no one speaks the truth. And they have taught their tongue to speak falsehood. Again, I don't necessarily want to say that everybody involved in this verse is doing it knowingly and on purpose. Okay? They're doing it often not having any idea that they're doing falsehood and not speaking the truth. He says, you live in the midst of deceit. Through deceit they have refused to know me, declares Yahweh. So, where is it in there? It says if they refuse. He said, where is that? Where are you in all that? Could it be because there is still part of you that's drawn towards whatever it is out there that matches what you'd rather it be than maybe what it is? We all have a preference. I would prefer this to that. If given two choices, you'd have a preference. And so coming from a background, depending especially on how many years you've been in that background, you may have some strong comforts in certain particular leanings. And so you're going to look for teachers that are going to give you an encouragement that those leanings are correct. But you want what's correct whether or not your leanings are there or not. And some of your leanings may actually be in areas that are correct, but you want to make sure that you can filter whether it's correct because it's correct or correct because you want it to be correct. You see? And so he talks here about deceit. You live in the midst of deceit. Through deceit, they have refused to know me. In other words, through their preferring what they prefer, they've refused to know me. Now, we realize that's why deceit's in there. They think they are knowing him. They believe they are knowing him. They are deceived themselves. Okay? Our fathers have inherited lies. We've been given strong delusion. All those things play into all of this. And so they have chosen the deceit is really what I think is going on in verse 6. All right, verse 7, therefore thus said Yahweh of hosts, see, I shall refine them and shall try them, for what shall I do because of the daughter of my people? Okay, so now he's saying, look, the only way to get this to work out is I've got to test them. I've got to put them through some pressure to see if they can actually wake up and see where the deceit was. Are they willing to be shown the truth from the lies? He says, I'm going to test them, to try them, to prove them. Deuteronomy 8:2, right? He says, Yahweh led them through the wilderness to test them, to prove them, to see whether it was in their heart to keep the commands or not. That's what he's talking about here. He says, I'm going to refine them and try them. Now, the testing and proving process is a refining process. Okay, what happens during refining when you're talking about in the idea of, say, metals? Okay, when it goes through a refinery, or oil goes through a refinery. When you talk about a refinery, what's happening? Impurities are taken out. It's a process through which, and it's under a lot of pressure, a lot of heat, they're doing some stuff to whatever it is that's being refined. And it's pretty strong what they're doing, but what it does is it separates the impurities from the pure. Okay? And so he's saying, look, I'm going to put them through stuff that's going to refine them. So these people all understood what refining was. Okay? It doesn't mean just taking them and polishing them up. It's a refining process, a separation of the pure from the impure. He says, verse 8, he says, their tongue is an arrow shot out. It speaks deceit, speaks peaceably to his neighbor with his mouth, but in his heart he sets his ambush. Okay, so here's the first appearance of the word heart here. And he says, look, their tongue is an arrow shot out. It speaks deceit, speaks peaceably to his neighbor with his mouth, but in his heart he sets his ambush. Now realize, again, I don't know that I would say that this means he's doing it consciously. In other words, he's speaking to his neighbor, trying to get his neighbor to agree with him because he thinks he's right. So he speaks peaceably and he's all nice to his neighbor because if they're going to be nice to you, and you've all experienced this, they will always be nice to you as long as you're seeming to be open. As soon as you show that you're not, then they lash out and get nasty, don't they? Okay? And the reason they do is because they have a wants-needs disconnect, and we've talked about that a lot. We haven't talked about it maybe in a couple of weeks. But when you need something, that means you must have it. In other words, like breathing. Okay? And so what happens if somebody challenges your ability to have a need like breathing, you may get violent because you need to. And what happens is people end up treating a want like a need, which means that there's no allowance for you not to have it or not to do it because they need it. And so when they need you to agree, they're great and peaceable and loving and everything's great as long as you look like you might agree. As soon as you don't look like you're going to agree, it may start to get a little uglier. Have you experienced that? Okay? And so that's because of this wants-needs disconnect. And so it says here, look, it says, so that because their heart is actually setting an ambush. It's not so insidious, I don't think, as it sounds here. Now, there may be some that we're doing this, but I think that we do this not knowingly, because our desire is to get you on the same page with me. Okay, if I'm that person, I want you to be with me on the same page. So it's almost like I'm setting up the ambush. I'm trying to be loving and friendly and gentle and peaceful to you, and I'm just trying to gently show you the path to the right understanding that, quote unquote, I have. But really, it's all just trying to get you to where I am because I need you to agree. It's a personal thing to me. I need you to agree with me. And that's where these people were at this time. Now he says in verse 9, he says, would I not punish them for this, declares Yahweh? Would I not revenge myself on such a nation? Why would he do that? Because he doesn't like people doing that to his people. He wants you to only realize there is one need, that you listen to him. That should be your need. And you don't need everybody else to listen to him. You just need to listen to him. I would love for you all to be a Torah observant to the best possible level that can be done. I don't need you to. If I needed you to, I would be frustrated every minute of the day, just like you would if you needed me to. No, nothing personal. I'm just saying, if we need the other person to behave a certain way, that's, by the way, why we get so frustrated when we parent, when we have children, when we have employees, whatever it is. We need them to do things when we should just want them to do things. And because it's a need, if they don't, we take it personally. Well, guess what? The only one that takes it personally really should be him. And the Creator says, I take it personally because I need you to do this because I made you to do this. And if we're going to have a relationship, you need to do it. So he says, would I not punish them for this? Would I not revenge myself on such a nation? Because for him it is personal. It was a covenant. He takes covenanting very seriously. Apparently, this people did not. At least maybe they didn't fully understand the covenant. The covenant's not complicated. You agree to do what I say, Yahweh says, if you agree to do what I say, I agree to take you as my people. That's it. 2 verses in Exodus 19. Okay, Exodus 19, I think it's verse 5 and 6. That's it. If you agree to do what I say, I agree to take you as my people. It's not a real complicated contract. I mean, I've seen a lot of contracts, hundreds of pages, sometimes dozens of pages, sometimes line upon line. You can't even read it. No, 2 verses. Listen to me, and I'll take you as my people. That's it. That's what Yahweh says. So now he says, look, wouldn't I avenge myself or revenge myself on this people? I shall take up a weeping and wailing for the mountains and for the pastures of the wilderness, a lamentation, because they have been burned up without any passing over, nor has the voice of the cattle been heard. Both the birds of the heavens and the beasts have fled, they have gone. And I shall make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a habitation for jackals, and the cities of Yehuda I shall make a waste without an inhabitant. Who is the wise man that he understands this? And to whom has the mouth of Yahweh spoken that he declares it? Why has the land perished? Has it been burned up like a wilderness with none passing through? So now he's saying, we should get this. We should see it happening. We should understand. He says that's wisdom. He says, who is the wise man that he understands this? Now look at verse 13 as he explains. Yahweh says, because they have forsaken my Torah. Do you want to understand why the wisdom that you're supposed to have in verse 12? You have to understand that this is because they have forsaken my Torah, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked according to it. Okay, so they haven't obeyed his voice, so whose voice have they been obeying? Their own voice, other people's voices that feed into their own voice, but still it's their own voice. The ultimate problem is the I prefer, I don't like, I. Okay, that's ultimately the problem. And that I gets fed by other people saying the things that you actually match up with your I. Oh, but I don't like. And then you find somebody that says, but that's okay, you don't have to. Or you say, but I prefer. And then you find somebody that says, but that's good because it's okay to do that. That's the I. Because look, you know where the I comes in? Listen to the next verse. But they have walked according to the stubbornness of their own heart and after the Baals, which their fathers had taught them. Okay, there's the I. It's right there. He said, they've walked according to the I want, I like, I don't, I think. Well, I don't think that's fair. Why do we have to do this? Why should I have to do that? I don't think it's so bad if I do this. Really, does it matter that much if I do that? Anybody say any of those phrases ever? I hear them all the time when people talk to me. Well, but I mean, is it really that big a deal if I do this or don't do that or this or that? I don't know. He says, they have forsaken my Torah and have set before them and have not obeyed my voice nor walked according to it. Now notice he had to say it twice. He said, they've not obeyed my voice, which could simply have the idea of, well, when you ask a child, well, did you hear what I said? And they say, yes, but they didn't do it. He wants to make sure that it's heard and that they did it. He says, look, they have not obeyed my voice, nor have they walked according to it. It's sad. But what's the problem? Stubbornness of their heart. Now look, I could have done a study just to show you all the places he uses that phrase. So some of you say, wow, you just read a phrase like that last week and the week before. Yes, because he said it each week. Every chapter we go into, he seems to be pointing out they have stubborn hearts. Stubborn hearts. And my mother-in-law used to call, sometimes when she would see people that were going in those directions, she'd say, you're such a stubborn. So it's not just that you have a stubbornness, but you become stubborn, that you actually are. Don't be such a stubborn. That was her bad English coming from Eastern Europe. But it's actually, I like the way it sounds, saying, because you become that. It becomes who you are. You become this stubborn thing. See, something that you do, if you only do it once or twice, is just something you did. But it's something that you do habitually, it becomes who you are. Okay, in other words, let's say you did something and you were, quote unquote, driving me crazy. That's a phrase, it's an idiom phrase we use, right? I could say, oh, you're driving me crazy. And you could take that as thinking, oh, he thinks I'm the type of person that basically drives him crazy. Or you could realize, since it only happened the one time, that that one thing you were doing at that one moment I felt was driving me crazy. You understand? Or if someone says, stop, that's annoying. Now you could either realize that the person is saying that particular thing at that moment was being received as annoying, or you could interpret it as saying that person thinks I, in my being, am an annoying person. Guess what? If whatever it is that you're doing it habitually, then it is what you are. You are annoying or stubborn or rebellious or whatever the word is that Abba's trying to use here for you. And so that, by the way, works the other way around. There are people we know that are always cheerful. They're always smiling. They're always positive. They're always saying yes when you want anything or need anything. They're always, it goes both ways. You are what you are. And guess what? There are words to define it. And so don't be upset if the word actually fits you. It's like if the shoe fits, you got to wear it, right? So here it is. He's saying, look, they have walked according to the stubbornness of their hearts. And I want to encourage us that if you want to fix everything in your life that's not right, find the stubbornness. Because that's probably where the problem is. There's still some stubbornness going on in your heart. And the stubbornness always looks like, but I don't like, or but I want. That's where it's got to come back to that. Your preference clashes with what he says. In other words, you don't really want to do what he said. And so, because you really, really want to do what you want to do. And so that's where the ear ticklers come into play. That's why there's 5,000 million zillion whatever teachers out there, because after all, there's one out there that will match what you want. And will say what you want to hear. And by the way, they're not trying necessarily to ear tickle. So when it talks about the tickling of the ears, it doesn't mean that the teacher necessarily is trying to tickle the ears, although that happens. It simply means that you'll find one that will tickle your ears. You can find a teacher that will say what you want, absolutely no problem. Go on YouTube and look, and you'll find a teacher that says whatever you want about whatever Torah command, including ones that say you don't need to do any of it. You can find a teacher that will support whatever point of view you have about anything. But is that being stubborn of heart? He's saying that is the heart of the problem for this whole people. Judah was suffering from. The heart of the problem there was stubbornness of heart. That was the core issue. When I say the heart of the problem, that's the core-centered issue. That is where it all comes forth from. That is the birthing point of the problem. A stubborn heart. And the stubborn heart has to do with I don't like, I prefer, I want, I like. Instead of always saying, he wants, he likes, he desires, he doesn't want, and that's all you care about. That's so hard to do. It's easy to say. And so I'm not claiming I've got this down. None of us does. But we have to focus and we have to endeavor in that direction. We have to put in the effort to get to that place. That's our goal, to get to the place where it's always about what he wants and not what we want. So continuing in verse 13 here, go to verse 14. Oh, actually, in verse 13, I want to talk about the word forsaken. So it says here, they have forsaken my Torah. Forsaken. A lot of people don't even know what that word means. I mean, that's not a word you use all the time. So I'll give you some more clarity here. It means departed from. It means abandoned. It means left behind. Because it could be on some stronger levels. Okay, so abandoned is a fairly strong thought. Abandoned it. But you know what? Sometimes it's as simple as simply just leaving it behind. Or in between might be the idea of departing. I'm not abandoning, I'm just departing. And sometimes it's as gentle as just by ignoring it or by neglect, you left it behind. And so all of that is wrapped into the Hebrew word there for forsaken. Okay, that's all part of the possible meanings of that word. So he's saying, look, they have, he says, and Yahweh says, because they have departed from, abandoned, or left behind my Torah, which I set before him. So it doesn't have to be in some sort of angry thing going, I don't want this stuff. It could be as simple as just, I liked something else better. And so I just stopped doing it. And he says, look, because of that, They've forsaken my Torah and set before them and not obeyed my voice and walked. It says they've walked according to the stubbornness. So all of this comes back down to that. Verse 14, it says that the stubbornness, he goes, that they have, what's it say at the end of the verse? He says, which their fathers had taught them. Okay, so here we're focusing on our own stubbornness of heart, but guess what? We watched our fathers do these things. That doesn't necessarily mean our literal birth fathers. It could be the leaders and elders that we grew up with, the adults when we were children, the other leadership people when we were adults, generationally. In other words, we've observed those that should be the father figures, so to speak, in all of this, doing these things. Our fathers taught us, hey, this is the right way to worship the King of the universe. This is what's pleasing in his sight. We've learned these things generationally. And so that's one of the things he said. Look, they taught you. He says, you're walking according to the stubbornness of heart and after the Baals, which their fathers had taught them. And so we have to realize we can't just go back and say, oh, but this is all I know. This is how I grew up. Well, guess what? At some point, you're expected to think for yourself. You know, we have like Ezekiel 18, I think is where it talks about, look, if your father did badly and you do right, won't you be judged right? And if your father did right and you do badly, won't you be judged badly? I mean, ultimately, at some point, you're on your own. You can't blame everybody else. We're not sitting at the couch trying to do, Freudian something and saying, well, it's my father's fault, my mother's fault, and you don't blame everybody. No. At some point, you take responsibility. Now, maybe their fault how you got here. I'm not saying that they're not part of how you ended up where you are, but now at some point you have to stop blaming them and take responsibility to where you go from now. From this point forward, it's on you. It may be because of them that you got to where you are. After all, that's the way that you were raised, the community, your physical family, whatever, the society put you in that place. But at what point do you start saying, but I can make independent choice? Look what Ruth did, right? She was raised in the Moabite culture. She was raised in a whole Moabite society with all of everything that goes along with it. And yet at some point she said, you know what? Regardless of all of that, I'm going to make an independent choice to go in this direction. We all have that opportunity. Every single minute of every day, you have that opportunity to decide and to choose. This is why the teaching I did a long time ago, maybe not so long, a couple of months ago, called Making Decisions, the Reason You Exist, is so important because that's the whole point of it, is Abba wants to see what decisions you will make. Will you choose to follow the fathers that have dealt you, unfortunately, a bad hand of cards, so to speak? They've dealt you a bad situation. You're just going to blame it all on that and just keep walking in and just go, woe is me. I guess there's no place for me to go. Or you're going to say, this ends with me. I'm going in a different direction. You want to know how to break a generational curse? It's a choice. Recognize it and choose to go a different way. That's how you break the curse. If your parents beat the you-know-what out of you and you don't beat your children, you've broken that because they're not going to learn it. You learned it because their parents did it to them and them and them. So you break it by just literally don't do what they did. You stop the cycle. You have alcoholism problems, so you don't drink anything. Your children don't see it being drunk, and then the next thing you know, it's not a problem anymore. You break a cycle. Whatever it is, you break the cycle. So you want to break those generational curses. Don't sit there going, I've got to go to some, deliverance ministry and do some sort of magical incantations and say special prayers to break a generational curse. Just stop doing it. Make it you. I hate to sound that simplistic, but it doesn't take more than that. Say, Abba, give me the strength to let me be the one that stops this craziness, that doesn't curse the next generation and the next generation. Because how do we curse them? We curse them. This is what it says in verse 14. This is generational cursing. He says, which their fathers taught them. They're doing all this stuff that they learned from watching the people who were before them. So set a different example and break the curses. Okay. Because the curses aren't the sufferings necessarily, although that's part of it. When he talks about generational curses, it means that you're setting them up for the same sufferings that you had because of the behaviors that you're doing, the behavioral lifestyle, the lifestyle choices. Does that make sense to everybody? And so that's really the key point, is that you may be suffering and go, well, I guess we're just suffering because of generationally, because of things these other people did. No, it's because you're still doing what they did. Stop doing it and things will turn around. Your parents never handled money well, so you're financially all messed up too because you don't handle it any better than they did. Learn how to do it right. Whatever it is, learn the right way to do it and turn it around. I'm not saying it all on your own strength. Go to before the Father, say, Father, I want this to be me. Help me to turn this around. I'm not going to sit here and say, woe is me, because everybody else in my generations all did it so bad. So no, it's not fair. I have to suffer because of what they did. Is it fair if you're going to perpetuate it so that the next generation has to suffer because of what you do? He sets it out, and that's the way the process works. You can have just the same effect generationally when you do right as when you do wrong. Do you understand that? You can have just as much impact generationally when you do right. It says actually even more so, because he says he blesses those onto more generations, and then he says he curses those. And think about it, up to 4 generations, he may say for those who do wrong, he says up to 7 generations for those who do right. It's got a deeper reach when you're doing what's right. Continue. Verse 15. He says, therefore, thus said Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, see, I am making this people eat wormwood, and I shall make them drink poisoned water, and I shall scatter them among the Gentiles whom they neither they nor their fathers have known. And I shall send a sword after them until I have consumed them. And so I'm not going to get into all the metaphors of the poisoned water and the wormwood. We could do that in another teaching. But understand he's saying, look, this scattering, by the way, which is promised in Deuteronomy, it's promised in all other prophecies prior to this, if you don't listen, I'm going to scatter you. Okay? And not just anywhere. In all the prophecies, I'm going to scatter you among the Gentiles, the nations. He says, I'm going to scatter them among the nations whom neither they nor their fathers have known. And I shall send a sword after them until I've consumed them. In other words, I'm not only going to scatter them, but they're not going to be treated real well where I scatter them. Thus said Yahweh of hosts. And by the way, haven't we seen that? Look at the Jewish people as they've been scattered amongst the world. Have they been embraced and loved in all the nations they've ever been in? Pogroms, holocausts, right? Why? Well, it was prophesied here. And that was a generational thing that, again, they hadn't fully turned it around. Because Judah still, for the most part, and I know a lot of Jewish people, but for the most part, they're not Torah observant. There's some, okay? There are some, but for the most part, they're not. Have you ever been to Israel? Okay, those who've been to Israel, would you say that most of Israel is Torah observant? Or would you say it's a real small percent? It's just a small percent. And so, yes, Judah has not turned this around because they've not actually turned it around. Not enough. But also it was prophesied that they'd be consumed. He said, thus said Yahweh of hosts, discern. I could just stop right there on verse 17. Discern. What does discern mean? It means to actively look at with the desire to understand and perceive what's really going on. He says, thus said Yahweh of hosts, discern, and they put an exclamation point in here. They don't put those in Hebrew, but there's an exclamation point in the English. Okay? There is no punctuation in the Hebrew. It says, discern and call for the mourning women that they come, and send the wise women that they come, and let them hasten to take up a wailing for us, and let our eyes run with tears and our eyelids gush with water. For a voice of wailing is heard from Zion. How we are ravaged. We are greatly ashamed because we have forsaken the land, because we have been thrown out of our dwellings. Oh yeah, they're going to cry out when it all hits them, but in some ways it's a little too late. But are they going to now take that as a lesson learned and then turn things around? But hear the word of Yahweh, O women, and let your ear receive the word of his mouth, and teach your daughters wailing, and each one her neighbor a lamentation. For death has come through our windows, has entered our palaces, cutting off the children from the streets and the young men from the squares. Speak, thus declares Yahweh, the corpses of men shall fall as dung on the face of the field. Their cuttings are the reaper, and none to gather them. Verse 23. Thus said Yahweh, let not the wise boast in his wisdom, let not the mighty boast in his might, nor let the rich boast in his riches, but let him who boasts boast in this. Okay, now we're really going to get to it, right? He said, let him who boasts, boast in this. Boast in what? That he understands and knows me. You want to boast in something? He says, let him boast in this, that he understands and knows me. That I am Yahweh. Now, this is interesting. In the other places we said they don't know him or they didn't know me. Now he's saying it on an even deeper level, that they would not only know him, but understand him. It's one thing to know somebody and not understand why they do what they do, but you know them. I know what type of person you are, let's say, and I know what you're capable of. I just might not understand why. He says he wants to say, you want to boast? Boast that you not only know me, but you understand me. That's a whole nother deep level. That I am Yahweh, he says that you know me, you understand me, that I am Yahweh doing kindness, right ruling, and righteousness in the earth, for in these I delight, declares Yahweh. So what he's saying is, by understanding that you understand why he allows the bad things to happen. He says, because he wants you to understand that even in all of that, I am doing kindness ultimately. That I am doing right ruling, and righteousness in the earth ultimately, even though you might not see it. We go through a lot of things where we can't see how that's kind, or how that's righteous, or how that's, because we just can't see it. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not true. But he says, look, let him who boasts, boast it, that he understands and knows me, that in all of this stuff I'm doing, because remember what he just talked about was the scattering and the suffering, and in verse 22, the corpses of the men shall fall, and all these other things. He says, but let them understand that still in all of this, there's kindness. There's right ruling, there's righteousness in the earth. For these are the things I delight in. What does he delight in? Obey and hear his voice. Do what he says to do, but do it with all of your heart and with all of your strength. And understand why he wants it done and why it's important to listen to him. Understand and know that he loves you. He wants kindness. And he never desired all this terrible stuff to happen. If they would have just listened, it wouldn't have happened. Now, how many times have you had to say to your child when something bad happened that you can't necessarily fix it, and you go, well, I'm sorry. I warned you, but now it's happened. What can happen? What do you want me to do? If you tell the child, don't do that, it'll break. Don't do that, it'll break. And then guess what happens? They do it and it breaks. And then they come to you and they go, and he's like, what do you want me to do? I told you, don't do this, it'll break. And so guess what? You didn't listen and it broke. So now you're all crying and whining and you want me to fix it or replace it. Well, no, guess what? I also told you that if you're going to keep doing it and it breaks, I'm not buying you another one. Oh, well, you're being all mean. No. If you had listened to me, it would be fine. But you didn't listen. That's our Father in heaven, just like any father. He says, if you just listen, we've been going through all these things. Continuing, he says here in verse 25, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall punish all circumcised with the uncircumcised, Mitzrayim and Yehuda and Edom and the children of Ammon and Moab and all those trimmed on the edges who dwell in the wilderness, for all the Gentiles are uncircumcised, and all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in heart. All right, so now let's talk about what he's talking about here. What he's talking about here is he's saying, look, the days are coming when I'm going to punish everybody together. Why? Because the circumcised in flesh are behaving like the uncircumcised, and so therefore they all get the same punishment. That's the equation he's putting here. He's saying they're equal. He says, look, the Gentiles are literally uncircumcised. He says, but my children, the house of Israel, guess what? They're uncircumcised in heart. And it's not enough to be circumcised in flesh. You have to also be circumcised in heart. And so he's saying they're going to receive the same stuff that Gentiles receive because guess what? They're acting like them, so you get to live in the same environment. You want to be like them? Well, then you get to reap what they sow also. You're going to reap the same stuff that they get. You don't get the special protections and treatments that I promised you if you were listening and your heart was circumcised. So he says, look, you're going to be in that same boat. You're going to deal with the same things. But let's get back to the word discern again. So all of this is, so he's saying, look, discern in verse 17. Pay attention, understand. He says discern. The Hebrew word there is hitbinenu, which means to separate mentally, to distinguish, to observe. Okay, it means to separate mentally, to distinguish, to observe, to watch, to look at. So he wants you to separate, to distinguish. When he says discern, with your mind, he wants you to understand, to be thinking about these things and say, okay, I see the fruit of this and the fruit of that. I see what Abba's talking about. I see what the other people are talking about. I see how that doesn't work and why it's not of him. I see what is of him and why that does work. He says, observe, separate, mentally distinguish what is going on. Watch and pay attention. Watch and pay attention. Okay, this connects to chapter 10 and verse 1. Listen, we're going to stay here in Jeremiah. I want to see how this discernment is going to cover a couple of verses here. Hear the word of Yahweh speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus said Yahweh, do not learn the way of the Gentiles, and do not be awed by the signs of the heavens, for the Gentiles are awed by them. So now he's saying, look, this is the discernment. This is what the problem is. When he talked about walking according to what their fathers taught them, he says, look, ever since he pulled them out of Egypt, and even before that, going back into history, they were always tempted to learn the ways that other nations were doing things and how they worshiped their gods. He's saying, look, do not learn the way that the nations do things. He says, that's the problem. The problem is that it looks fun, it looks good, it looks like it's reaping the kind of results that you want. He says, don't be fooled by all of that. It's just a delusion. It's not the reality. He says, look, do not learn their ways. Do not be awed by the signs of the heavens, for the Gentiles are awed by them. I know this is talking about, to some degree, that they worship the sun, the moon, the star. They worship all these things. But you know what? We have a lot of people that come out of churches who are still awed by signs and wonders. And they're looking for signs and wonders. And that's the key to their feeling like they're in the right place, is based on signs and wonders. And there are people that have attacked the Messianic body to say, well, this can't be the truth because we're not seeing the signs and wonders. Stop being awed by that. Go into any other religion that's out there, any of they're all about magical signs and wonders and manifestations and all this other stuff. Let's not be awed. He says, look, don't be like the Gentiles. They are awed by signs and wonders, basically is what he's saying. Why? He said, the fear of Yahweh teaching that we did is all about, he's saying, to have a proper awe of him. That's what the fear is. A deep, abiding respect and awe and reverence for him. He says these people are having awe for the wrong things. There's one awesome being in the universe, and he's not the one being worshipped by the Gentiles. Don't be in awe of that stuff. He says, for the prescribed customs of these peoples are worthless. For one cuts a tree from the forest, the work of the hands, a craftsman, with a cutting tool. They adorn it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers so that it does not topple. Anybody hear a Christmas tree in that? Okay, so anybody ever wants to know where that verse is? You know it's in Jeremiah 10. Okay, and he goes on and on and on with more of that. But just understand that here in chapter 10, it's getting the idea of, look, these are things that came from the pagan beliefs and observances that the Gentiles, the Goyim, were doing. And you can see it in Christianity. It got incorporated into their belief system. This is called syncretism. Okay, syncretism, syncretism. Okay, syncretism, not synchronized, but syncretized. Okay, syncretism is the idea of taking two things that don't necessarily belong together and merging them together. Assimilating them into, or merging them together. So there are these things in Christianity that never were supposed to be there, didn't belong there, got syncretized in. Christmas, Ishtar, Easter, these Sunday worship, these are all syncretized events. And now we're seeing the syncretism of Halloween in there, because it's becoming more and more a big part of what churches do. So ultimately, it's being syncretized in. You're watching it happen before your very eyes. So that has to do with, again, this idea of discern. He's saying, look, use discernment. He says, don't learn the ways of the Gentiles. And that also has to do with you guys stop bringing that into where we are now and saying, I want that stuff from over there brought in over here. And then being disappointed when what was over there isn't over here. Don't be in awe of that stuff. You know, he talks about this idea of not doing the ways of the Gentiles. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 4. We're actually going to jump into the Brit here for a minute. Ephesians chapter 4. And we're not going to get into chapter 11, I guess, at all. Okay, Ephesians chapter 4. I know, you're all surprised. Ephesians chapter 4, and we're going to begin in verse 17. So this I say and witness in the Master, that you should no longer walk as the Gentiles walk. Hey, there it is. Jeremiah is being channeled through Paul right here. Is that not the same exact thing we just read in Jeremiah 10? So nothing changed from Jeremiah's time to Shaul's time. Could you imagine how frustrated he was, seeing that that was still the case? Do you imagine how frustrated Abba is? The father is looking down and seeing, he warned everybody through Yirmiyahu, and still he's got to send another guy to say the same thing. So he has Paul talking. He says, say this. So this I say and witness in the Master, that you should no longer walk as Gentiles walk. And how do they walk? In the futility of their mind. Okay, this is tying everything I've said today together. What is the futility of mind talking about? The I. If you need to have your way, your thing, it's got to be all about the way I prefer, that's completely futile. That is the futility of your mind. You're saying, look, they're walking. He says, don't do what they do. He says, walking in the futility of their minds, having been darkened in their understanding. So basically, they're choosing to turn a blind eye or to cover their vision so they're not seeing the realities. They're not discerning. We just read that, right? In chapter 9 there of Jeremiah, about discern. So here about this darkening in their understanding, it's not some evil voodoo coming over them. They're just choosing to ignore and to not see and to not look. Let's not demonize this whole thing. He says, having been estranged from the life of Elohim because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. That's the problem. Now, what about this ignorance? Oh, well, it's not their fault. They're just ignorant. No, this is talking about voluntary ignorance. Choosing to ignore and be ignorant. Choosing not to listen. Because there's a lot of things that people have come to teach you, or maybe I've tried to teach you, and as soon as you started hearing, you go, no, I don't think I want to hear that. So rather than hear it, and now you can't say you're ignorant of it because you've heard it, you can choose to say, I don't want to go there. So this is ignorance by choice, in my opinion. Okay, maybe that's not what Paul's saying, but I think it's, in the context here, is ignorance by choice because of the ignorance that's in them. And the reason I think it's by choice is because the next part of it says, because of the hardness of their heart. They don't want to know. Okay, ignorance is a word dealing with not knowing something, right? It also has to do with ignoring. Isn't the word ignoring out of ignorance? So they're ignoring by choice. Because of the ignoring that is in them. They're ignoring the truth. Not just don't know it, they're choosing to ignore it. Why are they choosing to ignore it? Because their heart is hard. And the heart is hard, meaning it's stubborn. Now we're back to Jeremiah again. You see how this goes completely in sync. The one is saying the same thing as the other. He says, look, they are stubborn now, and because they're stubborn, they're going out into the nations, and in a futile effort to please the Creator, they're trying to find someone that's going to tell them that doing what you want will please Him. That's what people are doing. They're looking for somebody to say, yeah, that thing that you want to do, that pleases the Creator. So do it that way because you're right and you should be happy in what you're doing. So isn't that what Christianity does basically give you, is that you can do basically almost what you want to do and that pleases Him? And so Paul's saying here, no. Okay, verse 19, he says, who, having become callous, have given themselves up to indecency to work all uncleanness with greediness. So they become callous. In other words, I believe that's talking about that while they've been walking to ignore, while they've been ignoring the truth, and circumstances have happened, that's only hardened them, kind of like Pharaoh. Doesn't matter that you're receiving plagues. You're going to blame him instead of blaming you. You're going to blame others instead of blaming you. And you're going to get callous or hardened on your heart even more and more stubborn because it can't possibly be your fault. Anybody recognize that in yourselves? I know you recognize it in your family members and friends, but can you see it in yourself? Because we all have no problem seeing it in somebody else. Oh, some of you are sitting there going, man, I can't believe this is the week so-and-so isn't here. They really needed to hear this. Anytime you ever have that thought, you better quickly run and look in a mirror. As soon as you have the thought, oh, I know someone I need to give this to right away. Yes, you. Listen to it again. As soon as you know somebody you need to give a teaching to, you better realize you're the one that needs it first, because you're too busy thinking about somebody else instead of working on a plank in your own eye. Because you're not willing to look at it as you. All you're doing is choosing to think about who else it must be, because it can't be you. Believe me, it's you. It's all of us. The book is talking to you. All right, so after all, if we were in the same day sitting in Ephesus in this congregation, Paul would be talking to us. And are we going to claim now 2,000 years later after all of this that it's any different now? Has anything really changed? Or are we really deluding ourselves? Okay, so we have cell phones, we've got cable TV, we have cars, indoor plumbing, but really, have people changed really that much? No. We're just doing it with a lot more, user-friendly amenities. Okay, big deal. They actually ate food. We eat toxic, chemical, enhanced, treated, whatever, junk. So have we really done? So we have indoor plumbing, but they ate real food. I'd rather have outdoor plumbing and real food, I guess, Okay? I'll go dig a ditch, but give me real food. It sounds silly, but I'm just saying. So we think we're so advanced, but we're killing ourselves. All right, so continuing, he says, so they become callous, and so they've given themselves up. See, this is, by the way, why I believe that the ignorance is voluntary, because look what it says. They have given themselves up to indecency. Okay, that's a voluntary choice. They have chosen, they've given themselves up to indecency, to work all uncleanness with greediness. So let's understand the rest of her. So what does it mean to work? What is indecency and work uncleanness? It's not necessarily all of a sudden everybody's running around lewd and lascivious and all this other thing we think of unclean and indecent. No, it has to do with, again, they're not doing what Abba said. Okay, it's indecent to do things the way Abba says not to do them. It's also, in this case, when we talk about uncleanness, that's the definition of uncleanness. When you break commandments, that's uncleanness. But when he's talking about this here, and he's talking about them doing this in greediness, all of us probably read that and right away we're thinking about financial gain. No, greediness means because you want something to benefit you. It's the idea of benefiting you. It doesn't have to be financial. So what's driving all of this? The I. The me. The what I want. I don't like that. I don't want to do that. That's what's driving this. That's the greediness, is that I want to be happy doing what I want and win. I get to do it my way. All right, you want to sing the My Way song? You're never going to end up in the kingdom. Okay? All right, much more than this, I did it my way. Great. You can sing that, as everybody else who's going into the kingdom, and you're not. We're going to change that song. We're going to see if we can get it redone as I did it his way. Right? And through it all, much more than that, I did it his way. Somebody should actually we should do a whole, rewrite the words and change it to his way. All right? Sinatra's not alive to know any different anyway. So, all right? Now, but listen to verse 20. So after all of that, what he said here, what did he say? He said, but you have not learned so. You have not so learned Messiah. You've been told, you've been shown, you should know better. You should know better, he's saying. He says, stop this walking as the Gentiles walk in the futility of mind. By the way, he's talking to people that were there, and now they're supposed to be out of there and not bringing that with them, which is the whole point that we have in the body today. The mess that we have is because people are coming out of the world and bringing the world with them. Maybe not all of it, but enough different pieces of it. The things that they kind of liked and thought was justifiable and whatever it was. He says, look, you have not learned so Messiah. This is not what you've learned. By the way, when it says Messiah, it's talking about Yeshua, it's talking about the Torah, it's talking about the truth, because Yeshua says, I am the truth. We know the Torah is the truth. It's saying, you have not learned the truth that way. You have not learned the Torah that way. You've not learned Yeshua that way. If indeed you have heard him, and were taught by him, discipled by him, as the truth is in Yeshua. He said, if you have done this part here, he says, if you've heard him and you've been taught by him, and then you know that the truth is there and you've embraced it, you've not learned this other way. You should know better. He says, now that you understand all that, he says, look, the reason for this is, if indeed you do all these things, then you start to put off what? With regard to your former way of life. You need to put off your former way of life. By the way, it doesn't say accept the parts that you liked. It says, with regard to your former, it says, put off, with regard to your former life, the old man being corrupted according to the desires of deceit. What are the desires of deceit? You're lying to yourself that what you were doing to Yahweh was what Yahweh wanted when Yahweh hadn't said it. That's you deceiving yourself more than anything else. He says, and to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. He wants us to be renewed in the spirit of our minds, and that you put on the renewed man, which was created according to Elohim, in righteousness and set apartness of the truth. So put on the renewed man. By the way, the renewed man, I like the word renewed man there instead of the new man, because everybody talks about, do you believe in the whole thing of being the whole new man thing? Look, man was created according to Elohim in righteousness and set apartness and in truth, and then man decided not to go that way. We're trying to renew ourselves back to as originally intended. You know, verse 23 talks about the spirit of your mind. When we see the word spirit, we're talking about the fullness of how things were originally intended. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. The spirit of it is the fullness of how it was originally intended. He's saying, look, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. In other words, your mind was originally intended to be a certain way. And yet we allowed it to become corrupted. And so what are we to do? We're to put off the old life, the former life, the old man that is corrupted. By the way, the idea is not just saying that is wrong and evil. It says it's corrupted. Corrupted, something that's corrupted means it was okay originally. Right? It started out good, and then something corrupted it, ruined it, spoiled it, damaged it. And so he's saying here, look, we're trying to get back to that original manufacturer's reset. Well, you understand what I'm saying? We're trying to hit the manufacturer's reset button, get us back to as originally designed. So this isn't some brand new thing Christianity wants to promote as we're all part of the one new man thing and this all new man. No, we're just getting back to how we were originally supposed to be. This isn't a new thing. This is a very, very, very old thing that we're trying to get back to through a renewing. And you know what? Man has spent almost 6,000 years struggling to get there. And why? Because of what it says here. We have the desires of the deceit. That's the problem. We're corrupted. We're corrupted according to the desires of deceit. If we stop focusing on what we want and focus completely on what he wants, we can get there. Otherwise, we're stuck in this corruption of deceit. And deceit, we always like to blame as other people trying to deceive us. No, it's you wanting to be deceived. You want to be deceived. You want to, take the red pill instead of the blue pill or whatever it was, You want to live in the fake world where everything seems good. On some level. I know you'll say, oh, no, I don't. People are going to get mad at me. Oh, it's not me. I don't want that. Well, if you're still doing any of that stuff, you do want that somewhere, somehow. On some level. The reason you struggle in your righteous walk and you still sin is because there's something about that thing that you do that you still like. You wouldn't do it if you didn't like it. We generally don't do what we don't like. Now, hating it because you know it's wrong is not enough. You still like it on some visceral level. There's some level that you like that thing, whatever it is. Otherwise, you'd stop. And until we can admit that to ourselves, we're deceiving. And that's what this deceit thing is talking about. We are walking in this world lying to ourselves by convincing ourselves we're okay when we're not okay. And that's really what it's all about. We're going to end with that here. So hopefully we're really understanding that what Jeremiah, what the Father through Jeremiah in chapter 9 was trying to get us to do is to understand what has caused the problem. We've lied to ourselves. We've deceived ourselves. We've forsaken or departed from, abandoned or left behind so much of what we're supposed to be doing because of neglect, because of temptation to find some other way to say, well, I don't need to do it that way. We can do it this way, and it's just as good. Well, maybe not. And yet then we come to this discernment thing. And so we're going to pray now. When we pray, we're going to pray that we are given the strength to truly discern. Abba, we come before you. Father, we come before you now, wanting to be the ones of this generation that hear what you spoke to Israel through Yirmiyahu, to hear what you spoke to the Ephesians through Shaul. That, Father, that we have a problem in being enticed and tempted to walk as the Gentiles walk. And it's enticement because there are aspects of how they walk that we feel we can justify as being what you want when it's not. Father, we need discernment. We need to understand, to separate, to distinguish, to observe, to look at, to with clarity, with no filters, with no filtering processes that would have given us the thought that A is B and up is down and left is right, but that we see what things are with true vision so that we can then walk in it. We know that you said that these in the story here, in the account, were walking in the stubbornness of their hearts. And we know that in the Ephesians, we're talking about those that are darkened in their understanding because of the hardness of their hearts. Father, give us soft hearts. Help us to go through that refiner's fire. Help us to be molded and changed, but help us to have a heart that would soften to you, that would take away the calluses, that would take away the stubbornness so that we can just truly do it your way, that we can be receptive to your desires, your voice. We know that voice, that self-sovereign voice, is loud in our heads, but Father, we want to subjugate that and quiet it down so we can listen to your voice. So, Father, we come before you now and we implore you, we plead, and we humbly submit ourselves. We know we're wrong so often, and we know that we're sinners so often, and we know that we disappoint you on so many levels, but Father, we want to be the generation that's going to make every effort to do what's right and pleasing in your sight. But we need discernment, and that means that we have to have your help in putting down the old man. And, Father, that encouragement that we can do what we need to do. So, Father, we thank you. We thank you for sharing all of this with us, for giving us insight so that we can understand you, not just know you, but understand you, but also that we can know and understand ourselves. I think that's the biggest problem, is that we don't really know and understand ourselves. And that through your word today, I think we gleaned a deeper understanding of self, and that how that self needs to be related to you. So, Father, we thank you. We praise you, we bless you, and we so appreciate that you care enough to share with us this information so that we can change, so that we can be transformed and conformed into the image of Yeshua, the image of your Son. So, Father, it's in his name that we come now. It's in his authority that we come before you, and we ask and we seek and we knock in the authority of Yeshua Meshikenu. Amen ve'amen.